I will start a bit earlier just to welcome you and to let you know, as part of the guidelines for hosting this webinar, I'll need to record the conversation I have with you and subsequently the question and answers. We were supposed to have an International Leadership Week background to my video wall, but unfortunately the aspect ratio didn't work. As you know, with anything technical, you can always expect someone to mess up on the day, but notwithstanding that, I really appreciate your time, and I'm hoping that the hour we spend together will be informative and very, very relevant to a very sensitive issue that I think all of us need to have a view on how to tackle in everyday workplace life. So I'll just do that as a preamble, and I'm going to hope to start at 6 on the dot, because I think it only shows respect for those of you who have tuned in on time. So welcome, and welcome to International Leadership Week. This webinar is part of what I'm using to share my thoughts on what it's like to thrive in a toxic workplace, strategies for surviving and succeeding. It's clear that we live in very difficult times. If you just imagine that you're the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, going into work today, you will be full of really difficult feelings based on what has been revealed about the police force. This conversation today is not about the police force, but it's about toxic workplaces. And my contribution is to help you understand how you can thrive in a toxic workplace. It seems a bit at odds to assume that you can't thrive in a toxic workplace, but when I show you some of the things that you need to know, I'm hoping at the end of this webinar, it'll be clearer to you what you can do in terms of strategies for surviving and succeeding. I just need to move the slides along. 1 minute, sorry. Who am I? I'm Dr. Tim Ojo. I am a coach, a mentor, a mediator, an organizational consultant and psychiatrist. And the reason why I've enumerated the number of contexts in which I've come across toxic workplaces is because I want to tell stories that reflect the particularities of experience when people are working in toxic circumstances, and to share by illustrating from vignettes how people have managed to overcome them. Because if you look at any Google search, you see lots of stuff around toxic workplaces that you might as well say, what's the point of actually going for a webinar? This webinar is to particularize and to perspectivize the issues around toxic workplaces, such that at the end of it, you have a clearer sense of what it might mean to survive and succeed within them. I was a board member once, and having done an organizational culture audit, they came back to us and said that we had problems with bullying. And it was a shock, because at that time, many members of the board were not aware of the fact that there are issues of such in the organization, and they were concerned that the organization had a reputation that would go beyond the parameters of the organizational boundaries and impact upon our ability to care for patients. The reason why I share that is because people who are at the top of organizations are sometimes very surprised when they hear feedback from those who work within organizations about exactly how the organization is experienced by people. And therefore, it's important to think about toxic workplaces not just as a binary dichotomy where you have some workplaces that are toxic and others are not, but as a continuum where you have ranges of toxicity within the organization and areas that people find more difficult to work within than others. And I'll illustrate that as we go along. Now, the purpose of this webinar is to explore the issue of toxic workplaces with the aim of sharing how best to survive and succeed within them. But not just that, but also to base your survival and success within toxic workplaces on effective personal strategies. So I'll be sharing a number of models that have been tried and tested that will help you understand how best to structure your strategy in dealing with toxicity in the workplace. I'm going to run through an introduction because we need to define what we're talking about when we talk about toxic workplaces. I need to tell you a bit about the prevalence and how significant the issue of toxicity in the workplace is, both in the UK and in the US. I'll look in terms of how do you identify a toxic workplace? Because actually it's not as simple as just going in and seeing stuff that you can say that is toxic and that isn't. It's a bit more nuanced than that. And then I need to talk to you about coping strategies. How exactly can you cope? And it's, as I said before, it's easier to think about degrees of toxicity, not a binary. All organizations at any given point may have interactions that are deemed to be toxic by individuals within them. And therefore, it behoves us to start thinking about a continuum and looking for areas where we can help reduce levels of toxicity, rather than saying some organizations are toxic and others aren't. Then there are particular difficult situations that you have to navigate within toxic organizations. And then I'll look at some things that can help spur us on, wherever we are in the continuum, about doing something to enable us fulfill our productivity and potential within such organizations. Now, some prevalence. Would you be surprised if they said almost half of UK workplaces are impacted by toxic work cultures? And in their context, they describe toxic work culture as problematic behavior, which is a pervasive issue, which has wide-ranging damaging effects. And it has damaging effects on the victims of toxic behavior and on the organization itself. And therefore, it's important that leaders and people within organizations take the steps to reduce levels of toxicity and to address it, because it has a negative impact for productivity, for engagement, and more importantly, for well-being. So if half of the UK workforce is impacted by toxic work cultures, then you have to ask yourself that one could assume that 1 in 2 of us on this webinar will be impacted by toxic work culture. And that may be true, but I'm here to say that different people will experience different aspects of their work culture as toxic. And therefore, one-size-fits-all approach to understanding toxic workplaces is not the right way to go about it. If you look at another statistic, one study showed that 23% of people in British workforce had been bullied at work. And bullying is one of the key determinants of how you decide a workplace is toxic or not. Another thing is about being left out of opportunities, being left out in communication, networks within the workplace is a very, very prominent aspect of toxicity at work. And in this sample, 25% of the population said that they felt left out at work. And it's particularly important in the context of blended workplaces now, where there may be times you're not going to be in the office. So the huddle, that was something that you relied upon to make sense of what was going on in the organization, is no longer available. And therefore you feel more and more extruded from what's happening in the organization, and is not very, very good. This is from America. And they looked at, relative to compensation salary, what were the factors that made people want to leave their jobs? Many of you have heard the saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think you could say culture eats compensation in terms of salary for lunch, because it says a toxic culture is 10 times more likely to make you leave an organization than anything to do with the salary. Job insecurity in an organization is 3.5 times more likely to make you leave an organization rather than salary. Levels of innovation is 3.2 times more likely to make you leave if there are low levels of innovation to leave an organization than the salary. So it's clear from the statistics that poor and toxic cultures impact upon people's willingness to stay in organizations. And this is data from America. Now let's go into what a toxic workplace is, because I'm going to use toxic workplace and toxic culture interchangeably, because I'm assuming that in a toxic workplace, a toxic culture is allowed to prevail in most parts of it, and with consequent damage to people who work within it and people who receive services from it. So what I won't do is just parrot what's on the slides, because you can read, but I'll try and put some context to it. And one of the key, wherever you look in the literature, some of the key elements you find that are repeated in describing a toxic workplace are issues to do with harassment, discrimination, or bullying. And actually, in British kind of employment law, those are things that are described. Although you will not know that bullying has no real comprehensive legal definition, but harassment has, and discrimination has certain legal definitions that put you on legal footing if you choose to take up against your employer for being discriminated against or harassed. A toxic workplace is characterized by negativity. There's a sense in which people just feel jaded and unhappy, and the whole aspects of organizational engagement, being committed to a corporate agenda, is not there. Dysfunction also in terms of people not communicating effectively, not being as productive as they could be because they're spending too much time dealing with issues of trust. And the consequence for the employees is that they feel disrespected, bullied, overworked, and stressed. But these are all subjective. So what I thought would be an interesting thing to do was to produce some speech bubbles that would then say, these are conversations that loved ones, friends, relatives might come back and tell you about their work and their working environment and their working culture. And it's in thinking through how this lands and thinking for yourself, have you been somebody who over lunch meeting friends, you complain about poor communication? It could be that emails don't get to you. It could be that you're being told things at the last minute. And that causes a lot of stress because you're always second guessing. And if you're second guessing, it means that you're not always sure that your contribution is valued or you didn't hit the mark. And if your contribution is not valued, you feel unrecognized and unappreciated. And we just see that there's kind of attritional kind of accumulation of small nicks that make it very, very difficult for you to feel safe at work. And when you're uncertain, and you're not sure about how you're rewarded in the system, competition becomes unhealthy. And you're probably working in overtime and doing extra work, trying to make a mark so people can see you, and your work-life balance goes out of kilter. And because there may not be systems for you to engage with to ease the burden on you, usually you find line management support ineffective. And there is something called organizational climate. For those of you who have done kind of leadership assessments and evaluations, the organizational climate you experience as an employee is what your line manager creates. He or she or they, how they deploy their leadership to serve you as their line structure is what you experience as the climate. And you can have an unhealthy climate because your leader, your manager, is not doing his or her job properly. And people say there's a kind of common saying that you join organizations and you leave managers. And I think in this whole conversation about toxic workplaces, the line management relationship is crucial and essential. What about, so just going back there, unbounded work, as I said. When you work in matrix teams or cross-functional teams, having a clear sense of what your boundaries are with your team and where you extend the boundaries beyond your capabilities in a matrix is important. A number of times I've worked in organizations where actually team cohesion has become unbalanced because the nature of the project means people who don't trust each other, who don't feel safe in each other's company, are working together. Another thing that is very, very important to take into account is low psychological safety. I think the ability to say things that are not going well, either for you or in terms of delivery of your service objectives, and feeling that you're not going to be hammered for it, you're not going to be punished for it. It augurs well for organizational engagement and productivity. But where you have low psychological safety, where people feel that they can't speak their truth, and even if it's wrong, that they will have a fair hearing of what they think the issues are, you have low psychological safety and low commitment. And that leads in some ways to cynicism. And people start just, begrudging everything that's happening. They have no sense of giving over discretional effort into organizational affairs. And they probably look for people who have had similar experiences as themselves and club together. And you start forming groups of people who are showing animosity towards one another because they have different interpretations of how the organization engages with them. And what's also important in toxic environments is that the employee is left feeling unsupported. Let me give you an example. I'm working with an accountant who, over 2 years, was the principal accountant for a very massive multi-billion pound business deal. And unfortunately, while he was working, the person he was working with had to leave, and she was not replaced. And unfortunately, he worked so hard, partly because of kind of constitutional predispositions and familial type vulnerabilities. He went down with a heart attack, which luckily he survived. He went back to work and made his representation around what needed to change, but he wasn't listened to. And in the end, he had to give up work. The issue now is that he no longer feels able to work in his chosen profession. He cannot work where he used to work before, but his insurers won't pay out, understandably, because they're saying, look, actually, you haven't reached the mark where we think you're no longer viable as a professional. The story there is that sometimes actually doing the work where everybody's patting you on the back is actually toxic, because you're not getting negative feedback in terms of bullying or harassment, but what you're getting is you're being overburdened. The boundaries of your work are not being respected. Your work-life balance is out of kilter. And the risk is that at some point, you may come unstuck, like my clients did. Now, it's all well and good talking about this as if every single organization has the same pattern of toxic culture. And I said toxic cultures, toxic workplaces are dimensional in nature. You will find certain aspects more in certain organizations by nature of what they do. So in hierarchical organizations, you might find a lot of bullying. In organizations that have lots of matrix teams or cross-functional teams, you might have unethical behavior between teams or communication gaps and so on and so forth. But this is a kind of collection in clusters of the types of behavior you find in toxic cultures and therefore toxic workplaces. So disrespectful, where you feel that whatever you're saying is not valued. And that shades into non-inclusive behaviors, where the protected characteristics in the UK or whatever in the world, like gender, like race, like ethnicity, like religion, are not given the due kind of respect and factored into aspects of organizational life as they should be. Unethical behavior in banking, for instance. Recently, we know a bank has gone on there. And as I was doing my preparation for the slides, I remember a headline that struck me in 2016, and I just saw it today again. I'll just tell you this. The Swiss were concerned that in over 8 years, they'd lost 5 very senior employees. The case in point at that time was the Zurich Insurance, a previous CEO had just committed suicide. And that was 3 years after the chief financial officer had committed suicide, and in the suicide letter had written the name of the acting chairman. So it just shows that in that organization, in Switzerland, within 3 years, they lost 2 C-suite board members. I'm not surprised that the issues were around whether they're going to be sold on, issues were around pressures to fulfill shareholder value. And I guess what I'm saying is where cultures become cutthroat, where they're incentivized around money or privilege, they're as toxic as where it's about disrespect and non-inclusion. And it's about being able to understand how these various things cluster together to create a pattern that people then fall foul of and get into difficulty because of its impact on their well-being and mental health. So I thought not just to have slides. You look at people, most of the people interacting on this slide look happy. But could this be a toxic workplace? It's a rhetorical question because I know for a fact it could be. It's not based on a true workplace, but it could be a toxic workplace because toxicity is based on interpersonal connections. And there may be people on this as nice and friendly as it looks who don't get on, who may have issues with one another. And that may get played out in different contexts, in customer relationship management, in other meetings. So what I want to take from this picture is that it's not always as it seems. This looks like a good workplace. It may not be. And it's only when you're in it that you understand exactly what the problems are. Additionally, could this be a toxic workplace? I think the reason why I have put this slide in is to allow for the blended nature of how it works now. Many people work from home as well as at some designated workplace. And I'm assuming that you look at this, it looks very neat, it looks very kind of high quality. What if the person who is home office, that is unable to use it because they're off sick with stress? And actually what they get stress from are the emails that colleagues send to them. And I can tell you for a fact, in senior leadership in the NHS, in my personal experience, there were certain people's emails that you didn't look forward to receiving. And therefore, toxicity can be channeled through emails, Zoom meetings, Microsoft Teams meetings, and Google Hangouts, because actually it's about interactions, about what the people are pushing down the line towards you. So what I thought this would illustrate is that do not be deceived by the calmness and the serenity and the niceness of this. This could still be a toxic workplace. Now, what I've done so far is just to run through some of the obvious ways of describing a toxic workplace. But I think this equation, if you take nothing away from a conversation we're having, I want you to really take something from this equation. It's from 1936 by a German-American psychologist called Kurt Lewin. And B is behavior. And his argument was that behavior is a function of the person, I mean person in their entirety, their characteristics, their proclivities, their personality, and the environment. How does this connect to what we're talking about? It means that if you have somebody with the proclivity to being tyrannical and bullying, an environment that is hierarchical helps them become more bullying and more tyrannical. If you have somebody who comes into an environment that they think, say, somebody's coming as a change agent, a turnaround manager, who comes in and feels that the environment that he or she has come into is not conducive to achieving organizational best ends, their behavior might change to reflect that. So also, you can use it to reflect on yourself, to say, what is it about the environment I'm in that is affecting my behavior? Why am I so stressed? Why am I so avoidant of particular meetings? And then you say, aha, in that meeting, in the environment of the meetings that I go to at my role in my organization, there's a lot of backstabbing. There's a lot of kind of bitterness. There's a lot of kind of accusatory kind of interactions. And therefore, my preference as somebody who's sensitive and somebody who likes to be collegiate is that I find those environments very abrasive and I don't like them. And therefore your behavior is avoidant. Or for instance, you change managers and your old manager was somebody who understood you and allowed you a lot of leeway, a lot of autonomy. And the new manager is somebody who he or she is still struggling to get to terms with being recently promoted or changing jobs, and they want to micromanage you. And their behavior will impact upon the environment that you and them experience, and impact upon what I call the organizational climate. So the take away from this is that it seems simple, but it's not simplistic at all. It's a very complicated understanding of a tool to understand how to analyze your environment, and just about saying, well, what am I bringing? And it means that the more self-aware you are, the more honest you can be, and the more you can look at the environment and take some parameters to calibrate what the environment is bringing, the better you can understand your behavior. And it applies both to yourself and to other people you interact with. So if you go out of this webinar, look at Kurt Lewin's behavior equation and see what use has been put to. In this context, I'm saying use it to begin to identify why certain behaviors are prevalent in the environment you work in. And that's the utility of it in this context. Now, the important thing about toxic workplace is that the interpersonal is what you experience. It's the relational aspects that make things difficult for you. So what I thought I'd do is take some time just to look at what some of the definitions around harassment and discrimination and bullying are, and then we'll move forward. So harassment essentially is unwanted conduct. And then protected characteristics in the UK are based on the Equalities Act 2010, things like race, gender, religion, and such like. And the purpose of really focusing on harassment is it erodes or violates individual dignity. It creates an environment of intimidation, hostility, and humiliation. And it creates an offensive environment for the individual. And it's not surprising that person then feels a bit put out and uncomfortable, unable to cope with the stresses of the environment. So harassment is defined by law and is actionable if it can be proven between an individual in a senior position or vice versa. You can have your employer held to account if they do not protect you from harassment. Bullying, on the other hand, is one of those things that is very, very contested in organizational life. People are very clear they're being bullied, but the person doing the bullying will swear on whatever they swear on that they didn't intentionally bully, or they deny that their behaviors might be about being forceful, about being focused on outcomes, and the person receiving it is feeling bullied. So it's offensive, and sometimes it might be coded and not overtly offensive, but it's intimidating, it's malicious, insulting behavior, and it's predicated on an abuse of power that's meant to undermine, humiliate, denigrate, or injure the recipient. And you mustn't forget that you can reverse bully, or you can actually, people can bully their bosses. It's not about just your line manager, he or she bullying you. You can also, and groups cluster together to actually bully people around them. So it's important to understand that harassment, bullying are intersubjective. People can use even having lower kind of hierarchical status in an organization to actually bully you. I worked in a team where we kept changing managers because actually the environment within what manager was supposed to work was very, very difficult, specifically for the manager. And there was a multidisciplinary team in which we had different caring professions. And it just so happened that the person in charge of the team would always be a nurse and would have some difficulty managing aspects of the team. So it's important to understand that bullying can be reversed as well. Discrimination obviously is illegal if it's based on a kind of protected characteristic, but it's essentially when an employer treats one employee less favorably than others. An employer obviously means people who have authority over you. It might be around access to development, maybe around sanctions, where sanctions are over given at one end and undergiven at the other end. But people sometimes feel that they're left out of the essential things that could get them potentially moving up the food chain in organizations. So harassment, bullying, discrimination are key issues to look out for in terms of what you experience when you're in a toxic workplace. So what's the issue there? When you are in a toxic workplace, you get stressed. And I'll tell you, I'm going to show you a model of stress that might be interesting for you to learn. And stress essentially is about when the resources you have, your capabilities, your capacities, your skills, feel overwhelmed by the demands of the situation. If you're working where you don't trust people, where you don't feel you're being communicated with properly, where you feel you're being bullied or harassed, you will get stressed. And stress can lead to burnout. And burnout is where you feel emotionally exhausted, you can't work, and you have a negative attitude to your abilities and to the work. And it's a stage of stress where actually you're no longer functional. And many people don't recognize that their stress has become chronic until they're burnout and absolutely can no longer function. Anxiety, when you have challenges in going to work, when you're not sure what's going to happen in your performance reviews. And if you've been somewhere where you feel stuck, maybe because of work-life issues, financial issues, you can't leave, then it's quite clear that you might get depressed and your esteem will suffer and have disrupted family life, relationship problems, substance misuse. So it's clear that toxic workplaces are toxic for a reason. They impact upon people and they affect people's mental well-being. Now, what I have said, I think, is that having a binary between a toxic and non-toxic doesn't really hold true. Many organizations have elements of toxicity within them, and more to say high toxic or low toxic, because within complex organizations, you have areas that work very well and areas that work less well. And one of the examples would have been in Undercover Boss, which is one of my favorite programs, where a CEO, he or she, would go into the organization and find things that they found very, very difficult to understand. And people were coping on a day-to-day basis with pressures and that the CEO and people at the board would never believe happened in their organizations. But that notwithstanding, to thrive in a toxic place, you have to cope. You have to understand what your own capabilities are and your own resiliences are. And I think coping strategies is an important aspect because it's something I need us to talk about in this webinar. And I'm going to share a very fundamental model that can help you cope in your personal circumstances. This is the Folkman and Lazarus transactional model of stress and coping. What I will just do is to run it through and give you an example. Somebody at work senses that the environment has a number of possibilities. If I think I'm going to get a promotion, then it's positive, it's not a problem. If I think a number of people are being kind of managed properly and I'm not impacted by it, it's relevant to me, and therefore it's okay. But if I think there's something that directly affects my well-being, my potential for promotion, my ability to line manage my staff, and I perceive it as a threat, a challenge, a threat, a challenge, or there's some loss attached to it, so it keeps going back, I don't know what's happening here, then I will feel stressed. And when I feel stressed, I now start thinking, what can I do about it? If I feel I have resources to do something about it, then I don't feel stressed anymore. I can go and talk to my line manager, he or she's understanding. I can ask for some additional support. I don't feel stressed anymore. But if I don't think I'm getting adequate resources, I feel stressed. And I then start saying, how can I cope with this? And there are two ways people try to cope with stuff, either by problem-focused coping, where you're saying, look, I actually know what I can do. I can make some changes, and I think I have the wherewithal to make those changes. And if I make those changes, I will reappraise whether I have reduced my stress. And if I've reduced my stress, fantastic, I calm down for a bit. Emotional focused coping is where I think, you know what, I can't really do much about the practicalities of every day in this particular workplace, but I can change the way I deal with it. I can use more of my relaxation, my talking to family, my using mentorship at work to cope. The reason why this is a very powerful model is that anybody can use it to trace where they're at. And the assumption we must make is that in a toxic workplace, you feel threats, risk of harm or loss, and there's danger. You feel that you have insufficient resources to deal with what's at hand, and you get stressed. And that stress is not managed by your problem-focused approach, or indeed your emotion-focused approach. And therefore you keep going down that loop until in a vicious cycle, you get to a point where either you break down or you have some release by leaving the place. I'm mindful of time, so I won't rush, but I just need us to understand that I've introduced the concept of behavioral equation, and I've introduced the concept of the transactional model of stress and coping. And we can talk about that in the Q&A, but these are very, very helpful models that are not highfalutin. They're very, very clear, and you can apply them to your circumstances. Sorry, I keep moving these things too fast. Now, essentially, the summary of that slide is there a problem? Can I cope with it? If I can't, I feel stressed. And if I'm stressed, I try and cope with it by changing the task or changing how I feel about a task, and then I reappraise what has happened. So there's a kind of, just to show that apart from that complicated, colorful diagram, you can just do a linear approach to it. And there are many ways the transactional model of stress and coping have been drawn in literature, and you can just find the one that works for you. Now, one of the things that I think is also important is you can do analysis of the environment, sense make what's causing the toxicity. You can do self-evaluation of yourself, determine whether or not you're coping and how you're coping. And in order to cope, you need to be sure that your self-care for managing stress and burnout is sufficiently robust to push stress or manage it and to prevent burnout. You also recognize that it may well be that you love your job and that every part of it is okay, except for one boss who he or she just finds it interesting to make your life miserable. And it's about how you develop resilience and workarounds to engage with that. And also, it's always very clear that people I have seen in practice who come because they're concerned about their well-being in a toxic workplace have little by way of supporting relationships at work. And therefore, job crafting, which I'll explain, is a way in which you can take control of your own circumstances. And I'll just tell you a bit about job crafting. Job crafting is what people do to redesign their own jobs in ways that fosters satisfaction, engagement, and thriving at work. And if you assume that a job essentially is a collection of tasks and interpersonal relationships assigned to you in your organization, then everybody job crafts. And what it means is that there are three basic job crafting techniques. One is around the work you do. Two is around the relationships you build in doing the work you do. And three is around the way you think about the way you do your job. So I'll give you an example. The apocryphal tale of the cleaner who worked at NASA and on a visit was asked what they did. And what they said was they helped send people to the moon. On one level, it didn't really make sense because they were not rocket scientists. But on the other level, because the environmental cleanliness was important to scientists, it did make sense that they did help send people to the moon. Another example was a lady who was an attendant at the petrol station I used to frequent. She had a gift of just engaging with you in a very, very positive way. She took her job beyond just selling you stuff to actually engaging with you to the extent that you looked forward to going to that petrol station. And if you had to actually spend 10, 15 minutes more, you would go there. It wasn't surprising that she won a regional prize for customer service because she went beyond, and that's because she took her task and relational job crafting and changed how she experienced work, and obviously changed the impact of her work on her customers. Now, it's clear job crafting is not something I invented. It's been around for a long time, and job crafting is deemed to be a powerful tool for employee wellness. I know that the literature is very, very clear. I'll give you an example in more detail of job crafting is a way for employees to improve their life at work, as well as to make valuable contributions to the workplace. When you craft, you recognize that job design is not fixed. If you have two managers with the same job description, they do it in different ways, and that's crafting. Nobody actually works exactly to the last letter of what their job description says. You find ways of doing your own job, and those ways are usually in helping you keep authentic and recognize your own unique, ever-changing requirements, needs, and preferences. So job crafting is a good thing if your employer allows you to job craft. Now, sorry, this is horrible. I don't know why this keeps doing this. Now, one of the things I highlighted there is that job crafting, not just for when things are okay, when things are less okay too, you can use job crafting to change adverse issues at work. Now, if you look at this, the crafting techniques, the first ones relate to the task, how you do the job, changing aspects of it to suit your personality, to suit your preference. Even people on checkout tools in kind of department stores and stuff, the way they interact, they have a choice on what they say. And I remember going to a supermarket, I didn't realize that some supermarkets have scripts that they give people, there's prompts of what to say to customers, and then they allow the checkout person to do it in his or her own unique way. Relationships are important when we're talking about workplace toxicity, because if you build meaningful, helpful, and energizing relationships with others, then you're okay. It means that some of the resilience that they bring by their support to you, it will help you face adversity easier. Sometimes you need to avoid certain people because actually just make your life difficult. And it's important to see that as part of job crafting. Job crafting is also about dialing down the toxicity in the system you find yourself. How you frame what you're doing is important. How you think about what you're doing can bring value to you. So that example of the NASA cleaner saying, look, they sent people to the moon was important because actually it's a messy job, and who knows what the personal habits of the scientists were at the time. But it was an apocryphal tale that says even what's on the kind of food hierarchy of importance seems to be a low job can be crafted in a way as to give the person doing it some value. Now, the evidence is that if you do job crafting, you have increased sense of competence, personal growth, and ability to cope with future adversity, something called self-efficacy. There's a lot of literature on job crafting, and all you need to do, if you go into any reasonable type kind of search engine and type in job crafting, it'll show you more. But the key thing is to recognize it's something you do in an enabling environment to make the job more adapted to your particular preferences. And it's something you can use even in toxic workplaces to get over some of the challenges you face. So what are the insights from job crafting? Designing jobs is not just top down. Organizations that understand how job crafting can help their employees enable that. It's an important factor in how employees conduct and experience their work. It can have positive or negative outcomes for individuals or organizations. And it's important that the conversations people have with their line management align such that job crafting of a positive variety is allowed to flourish. Job crafters are in essence utilizing their jobs as resources to achieve desirable outcomes for their organizations. What about navigating difficult situations, setting boundaries, and addressing toxic behavior? That's very difficult because people I see with my clinical hat on have come at the end of situations that they find intolerable. I saw a paramedic manager who had been set an impossible task. And setting boundaries was very, very difficult because for boundary setting in those contexts, people's lives depended on it. But in order to succeed and survive a toxic environment, you need to be able to set boundaries and address toxic behavior, but ultimately have a clear sense of the exit strategy. So we'll go through that and see what we make of it. So what are your personal boundaries? It might be personal boundaries about your personal space, about how you're addressed, about how you best receive feedback. And people sometimes only let others know how they're feeling when things have gone bad. And my advice is that people need to be proactive about communicating what their boundaries are. It's important when you feel overwhelmed to have workable systems, and they're based on really breaking down elements of what you need to do on a daily basis to make it achievable. And there's a term called, how does work work? Some workplaces are designed as not to give you any time. And actually part of crafting is to get time for you to just think a bit, because you're going from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting without any rest time, which is sometimes the life of organizational seniors. There's no doubt you're looking at stress and burnout, and the toxicity would not be the type of where you suddenly just feel that you're being maltreated. It will be the one that you burn out because you're not taking care of yourself. Being professional is about making sure you know the boundaries between what's acceptable behavior, that you don't invite unnecessary kind of scrutiny into your workspace, and you don't cross boundaries in which you then become guilty of behaviors that can be construed as bullying, harassment, or discrimination. If you're in a senior role, even if you are somebody who has exacting standards, it's important to learn how to delegate. And one of the things about boundaries is not just saying no, it's meaning no, recognizing that you need to be very, very astute in what you say no to so you can defend that space. Rest is important, and also optimizing technology in the sense that don't be tied to your phone or to your device. It's about using it in a way that supports your best efforts. And some people say, look, sometimes responding to useless emails is the first thing they do, and actually it contributes to an environment where they never quite complete the crucial tasks they need to complete, and it's something people need to address. Sorry about that, this keeps happening. Toxic behavior essentially is about somebody's behavior on an interpersonal basis towards you. It's important to use, as I said, the behavioral equation to understand the context in which this toxic behavior is taking place. What's driving it? Are they being driven by their own manager? What is it about them that is causing them to behave in such a way to you? How do you take a step back and think about the best way of addressing the challenges they pose? Have they reached a stage where you need to make it formal? And if you do, what's your evidence trail for addressing toxic behavior? How do you avoid unnecessary engagement with them on matters that might be a ping pong of emails that are quite kind of derisory and uncomfortable and unfortunate? And if you get in a situation where you're thinking you're at the receiving end of toxic behavior, then you need to document everything. And also it's important to give feedback as required in real time, such that they don't say, you didn't tell me at the time, so why are you telling me 2 weeks after you came back from a leave when your friend had consoled you and counseled you to do something about it? And it's also important to know when to escalate. And union membership, having a kind of union representative on the shop floor will help you understand exactly when to do that. I've skipped one slide. Sorry about this. yes, sometimes it's impossible to carry on. And sometimes surviving is actually sacking yourself from, and you look at the acronym, is sacking yourself. We said, I can't deal with this anymore. People might ask me that I've got a good chance of getting through this, but there are times you need to look at yourself using your transactional model of stress and coping and say, well, you know what, I can't do this anymore. And accepting it without beating yourself up, that the problem has arisen from the environment and its impact on the work interactions with others, not based on any kind of deficit or flaw in yourself. Seek counsel, seek help from people who are wiser and more mature. And in some cases, if you got a good network, more senior to you, can fight your corner. No, the legislation, ITTC's implied terms of trust and confidence. And that's the last resort. When an employer and an employee have a contract relationship, it's implied that is based on trust and confidence. And if trust and confidence is ruptured on one side of the divide, then it's not viable as an employment contract anymore. And know when to go seek remedy for redress in where you've suffered detriment and where it's clear that there's a comparator that shows people who have been through similar situations to you have not suffered the same detriment you suffered. Then you have actionable cause to take forward. And that's what quite a lot of employment tribunals are about. So what I'll try to do, I'm going to try and give us time to talk, is the context of toxicity is on a continuum. It's individually variable in terms of how you respond to toxic workplaces. You can understand better if you use the behavioral equation to think through how am I behaving? What's the contribution of my own personal, totality of my person and the environment, and how does that apply to other people around me? In terms of coping, you can use the transactional model of stress and coping to actually work through some strategies. And important is that job crafting is not something you need necessarily to wait to do. You can do it, and you actually get support with coaches to help you job craft a bit better. So in ending, what I'm going to do is just share 3 quotes with you, and I think are very helpful in summarizing what I've talked to you about. And one that says, either you run the day or the day runs you. And that's a maxim you need to take into work every single day. If you work in a place where the day runs you, you're in a toxic workplace. You need to do something about it. It doesn't matter what the remuneration is. It doesn't matter what the prestige attached to that job is. At some point, something will have to give, and it'll be you. And what I mean by that is, how is your day laid out ahead of you? How does your day function in a way to make you produce your best work at work? And if you don't have those circumstances now, then you're in for difficulty down the line. The next thing is, if you have the courage to begin the process of self-evaluation, then hopefully that courage will get you to success. Because it's about saying, I can deal with this because I have developed a system, and by so doing, I'm actually modeling culture change that can benefit the organization. On the other hand, I can't do this anymore. I've done all my coping and all my kind of trying to craft, and I need to address this. It's scary because whistleblowers are vilified in most organizations, but I still need to do this. And it's about then plugging in to sources of support. And ultimately, when it comes to issues about toxic workplaces, the only questions that really matter are the ones you ask yourself. So thank you I've seen a few hands being raised. I hope you have understood what I tried to share here, and we will then go into questions and answers. Thank you very much. So if people have questions, well, I think the best thing is either that if you raise your hand, I can then give you permission, I can unmute you, and then we can have a conversation. Okay, so John, can you speak? I'll give you permission to speak.
Hi, Tim. How you doing?
Yeah. Hi.
I don't actually have a question, I have to say, but I really enjoyed the webinar, though. It's really helpful topics, and it resonated in a big way. A lot of what you're talking about, I could see from experience. What in past roles that I've had and a lot of the strategies you talk about are ones I employed myself to get myself out of it. So overall, really enjoyed the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it. Thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Suarez, you wanted to speak.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I wanted to show my appreciation to the webinar. Just as John said, it really resonated. I don't have any specific questions. I guess the next question one will be interested in knowing is what next? How can one get further support regarding this going on? Because I don't think it's something that can be sorted out just by one webinar.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm producing some stuff around job crafting coaching, around what I call a thriving collaborative. So watch out on LinkedIn. I'll be sharing some more things because I think this is such an important topic that I need to be able to support people for a longer term. So I'm bringing together some stuff, and I'll be inviting people to come and join, because I think when you work in communities with a shared set of challenges, you can get a lot of energy and a lot of support in dealing with your own issues that you sometimes might not get in your own workplace. So watch out, and I'll be sending stuff to you individually, but next few weeks you'll see a few things I'm doing from the health and well-being perspective of helping people manage their stress and coping, and then from the organizational effectiveness perspective of job crafting and applying those principles to your situation. So thank you for that, and I look forward to having you on board. Anybody else that wants to say anything? Questions? Janice, do you have anything to say? Janice, are you there? It seems as if there are no questions at this point in time. So all I can say is thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure sharing my time with you. I hope that you found some of what I've said to you useful, and I'm hoping in the fullness of time, we will have some products that some of you will be able to use to best effect. So before we go, I've got an old friend of mine who I don't know whether he just joined now. Ike, how are you? Ike, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, good.
Did you just join now? Because if
no. I joined till 2:30, and then I had another call.
Okay.
And then I came back on.
Thank you for joining. Ike is talking to me from America, and I haven't seen him in 43 years. No, yeah, I think no, 40 years or thereabouts.
40 years.
40 years. But so anyway, thank you. What I tried to do was give a dimension from America there as well, that actually toxicity in the workplace is a big issue across the world. And wherever you look in terms of big corporates now, there's a challenge on leadership to enable toxicity not to flourish. And as somebody I know who's an entrepreneur, any thoughts you want to share around your experience of helping to detoxify environments that you've had investments in or led?
Yes, actually, that's interesting that just last week, I was involved in what you might call a heated exchange, on the call with someone in the workplace, and the person was explaining something, but kept ending the statement with, is it clear to you? Is it clear to you? And I found, we have to be careful about how we end some of the statements almost, and I found that offensive, which I shouldn't have, and it got heated. And we exchanged words on the call. But after that, I made an effort and reached out and said, listen, let's talk. Let's reboot this conversation. Let's see where we have some areas of agreement. And we were able to do that and talk and diffuse it. So And what are your recommendations for dealing with toxic environment? One of the examples you gave was this guy who was overworked. I know so many examples of that. Who they had laid off. You said they had laid off someone in his team, and he was picking up the workload.
Yeah.
And then had a heart attack.
Yeah.
So what I know, I have met, one thing about being a consultant is that you have the liberty to end the contract. It's kind of, you know, it's different from an FTE, an employee who is kind of bound to the company, you know, gets a salary, and so might not want to speak up about where they feel they are overworked. What would you recommend?
I think the self-evaluation aspect of what I said is that people need to be honest with themselves and have the courage to say, look, if you're somebody who's a careerist and you're looking to improve your position in the company, it means that you might take on stuff that you don't need to take on. And at the same time, people find work for busy people.
Yeah.
About having organizational mentors that can say, look, you know, IK or Tim, you're overworking yourself. Much as I understand that you're able to do this, can you see where this might lead to? And if you can then support that person to understand exactly where their limits are and not take on too much work, then you're doing what you should be doing for them.
Okay. Okay.
The reason what I really tried to do here was, it's really about understanding yourself, because some people are able to work very hard for a very long time without necessarily having difficulties, and others are not. And if you're one of those who is not able to work that kind of diligently over a long period of time, and you take on more work, in a situation where you're not allowed to say no, then you're in trouble.
Okay. Yeah.
That would be my answer. And I think in some of your specific thing, you took exception because the implication behind saying what the person said to you was questioning whether you were sharp enough to understand it.
Yeah.
And if that person understood that that's what you were, where you're coming from, then maybe the problem might not have been while you were on the phone. So you couldn't really tell the person's a kind of demeanor and what they were really looking for. So these things happen, but you made the effort and had the courage to go and seek to restore relationship. That's good. Oh, thank you so much for that question. Any other things from any other person? Okay, and in that case, I really thank those of you who spent the hour with me. The slides will be uploaded. I think the recording also will be uploaded onto the TILM website. And as I said, please look forward to, I've got 2 or 3 courses and coaching things that I'll be sending on the back of this. But thank you so much. It's been a privilege sharing this evening with you. I wish you well wherever you are, and thank you. I think, let me just check. I can't think there are any answers I haven't. Okay, so I've answered all the questions there. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Bye.